This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
New study dashes hopes of long-lasting protection after being infected with COVID-19. Libya's quest to be reintegrated into the international community gets a big boost with resumption of flights to Egypt. And concerns over the impact of expected harsh weather conditions in Somalia. This is Africa Live. A warm welcome to the show. I am Penina Karibe, and joining me with a sneak peek of what's ahead in business news is Uche.
Thank you, Penina. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. The European Union backs Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to lead the World Trade Organization. And the resumption of international flights promises to boost South Africa's tourism sector. Of course, more on that coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you, Penina.
Thank you, Uche. And we begin tonight with news of a setback in hopes of acquiring sufficient immunity after getting infected with COVID-19. A study has found that antibodies against the coronavirus declined rapidly in the British population during this summer, suggesting protection after infection may not be long-lasting. Scientists at Imperial College in London have tracked antibody levels in the British population following the first wave of COVID-19 infections in March and April. Their study found that antibody prevalence fell by a quarter, from 6% of the population around the end of June to just 4.4% in September. This raises the prospect of decreasing population immunity ahead of a second wave of infections in recent weeks.
So the main change we saw between these three rounds of the survey was that the proportion of people testing positive fell from 6% in the end of June and July through to August, where it was 4.8%, and then 4.4% in September. So although those changes sound quite small, because of the numbers of people involved, we can be pretty confident that this is a real change. But overall, it doesn't change the fact that actually 90% plus of the general population is still susceptible to infection. In a sense, this doesn't change very much what we think about the need for a vaccine. So we knew early on that a very large proportion of the population was still susceptible to infection, and that's still the case. So there's still a strong need for a vaccine.
The African Union has called on member states and the international community to contribute to its Africa COVID-19 Response Fund. AU Chairperson and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said the fund has raised only a fraction of what is needed. CGTN's Girum Chala reports.
The African Union, Africa CDC and Afrexim Bank organized the AU COVID-19 Response Fund soon after the outbreak of the pandemic. The fund aims to implement a continental joint strategy to combat the pandemic. Also, it is instrumental to strengthen the African COVID-19 efforts, such as procurement of diagnostics, distribution to member states, and mitigating the pandemic's socio-economic humanitarian impacts on Africans.
This fund best encapsulates Africa's quest for self-reliance and our desire to be architects of our own destiny. With African countries and companies being the first to contribute to the fund, we demonstrated clearly that we as Africans are taking the lead in the role of combating this great tragedy that has befallen our continent.
The fund has raised $44 million, but is looking to secure an additional $300 million.
We need to raise at least a further $300 million to ensure assistance is provided to societies and countries in need, and to enable us to weather the health and economic storm in the weeks and months and years ahead. For us to continue with the prevention efforts and healthcare and case management for our people, the fund has to mobilize additional resources as quickly as possible.
Global bodies like the World Health Organization are supporting the African continent's strategy to combat COVID-19. The WHO has donated $5 million to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
COVID-19 has taken so much from us, but it has also reminded us that health is not a luxury item. It is the foundation of social, economic, and political stability. We're all in this together, and with national unity and global solidarity, we will overcome this pandemic together.
COVID-19 cases are rapidly nearing 2 million in Africa, with over 40,000 deaths. Officials at the Africa CDC say now more than ever governments must work together. IMF reports predict that the sub-Saharan African economy will contract by 3.2% this year alone. The World Bank has also fears of economic recessions in the region. This is why the Africa COVID-19 Response Fund becomes highly important to save lives, economies and livelihoods in the continent. Grumchala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The Egyptian Serum and Vaccinations public arm, Vaxera, is leading the nation's first phase 3 clinical trials for a COVID-19 vaccine. Egypt and 3 other Arab countries are participating in expanding trials that target 45,000 participants to test 2 Chinese-made vaccines. CGTN's Adel Mahroui speaks to Dr. Heba Wali, the chairperson of the board at Vaxera, about the trials and the company's future.
This is the first clinical trial for Egypt to hold and for Vaxera specifically to supervise. How significant is this step for the country and for the pharmaceutical industry?
It is very significant for Vaxera, for the country. It is very significant for the humanity because we're talking about phase 3 for clinical trial for a novel vaccine. It's going to encourage all the company which is producing the vaccine, pharmaceutical, to come to Egypt to start participating in such a clinical trial, because now we had an experience. This site had been audited by the Chinese company, had been audited by the Egyptian authority, and they approve it as a site for clinical trial. Very important point that we cannot able to participate in any clinical trial unless the site to be approved by the authorities.
What is your target for these COVID-19 trials? Is there like a time frame or a specific number of participants to be achieved?
Because now we had a crisis, we need to have a fast vaccination. So the Chinese people, they took a decision before finishing phase 3, they use it on emergency use, or they give an approval for using the vaccine on emergency use. They have a level of confidence that the vaccine is safe. Now we extend the number of volunteers, so give more confidence on the quality of the vaccine. So that's why they took a decision to use it on emergency use, not only in China, but also in Emirates. After we had a green light, or we had a clear significance of the titer for the antibodies. So when we complete the 6,000, and each one take 2 doses, and 45 days had been passed, so they can able to collect some data, and I think we can take a decision to make it on emergency use.
Vaxera is the government's biggest and maybe the only main arm for giving vaccinations in general. For the country to be depending largely on Vaxera, definitely you must have expansion plans. So what is the vision to expand your services to the public?
Vaxera is the oldest institute for the production of vaccine, not only in Egypt, but in the Middle East area and African countries. We have another one in South Africa. We can consider it's the house of vaccine. We're responsible for the vaccine for Ministry of Health, the vaccine for traveler, for military. So Vaxera is the largest, and it is the arm for the government for the vaccine, not only on a source of vaccination place, but also as a manufacturer of the vaccine. We had locally produced the insulin. We produce many types of anti-sera, for example, anti-snake, anti-scorpion sera. We have about 14 branches all over Egypt, and now we had expansion plan for the Upper Egypt because we are not there. We start to make a new places for us, new center for vaccination in Upper Egypt. So this is our future plan. Maybe inshallah will be by 2021 will be, I think, about more than 6 or 7 new vaccination centers.
The spread of the coronavirus in Kenya is adversely affecting cancer patients physically, financially and mentally. Apart from difficulties in accessing healthcare, some cancer patients have had their source of income cut. CGTN's Enoch Sikolia met Ruth Wanjiku, who has been battling a fast-spreading cancer for the past 6 years.
I'm Ruth Wanjiku. I'm 23 years old. I'm an online taxi driver. I had a cancer called osteogenic sarcoma. It started when I was only 17 years old. It started just like a little pimple and it made me got amputated. And it spread to other body parts, and I got my one lung removed. It's a relapse to the stomach, the lung also. Right now I'm fighting this cancer again in between the stomach, and it's still an osteogenic sarcoma. I'm in a risk of getting COVID-19 because my immunity is low. Whenever you are getting your medicine or your chemotherapy, always your immunity is low and you have to be careful so that you don't get this COVID-19. There was this time that I was in pain and I needed painkillers or more attention from the doctor, because when I was at home, I couldn't get enough care. So I visited a hospital, and it's a big hospital, but there were so many COVID-19 patients. So you cannot be attended to because they are attending to COVID-19 patients, so you have to go and look for another hospital. It's very hard and challenging because every day you are meeting a different person. Every day you can carry up to 10 people and you don't know whether they have COVID-19 or not. Sasa, you find yourself not going to work because maybe you think you'll get corona whenever you carry them. You have the bills to pay, you have the hospital bills, you have other bills, especially with the health issues. You have to buy medicine, you have to eat well, you have to everything that let me say you have a lot of things that you should do with money, but your source of income is closed. Like you cannot work because you fear the people you're working with, maybe they have corona. Most of the time you don't work because your immunity is low. Most of the time you don't work because you have pain. And this corona thing, I wish it can end like now so that we can go back to work as normal.
This is Africa Live. Time for us to take a quick break. Here's what's coming up in the program. Libya's quest to be reintegrated into the international community gets a big boost with resumption of flights to Egypt. And concerns over the impact of expected harsh weather conditions in Somalia.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography. And a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
On to Somalia, and climate experts are warning of harsh weather conditions in the coming months. The country's livestock sector is expected to be among the hardest hit, worrying both livestock traders and nomadic communities. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilu has more from Mogadishu.
At this livestock market in Baidoa, one of the biggest in the region, business is not booming. A combination of climate-related disasters in recent months has affected the once thriving sector. Climate experts are now warning that dry conditions is expected to last until the end of the year.
More than 85% of the community living here relies on the livestock sector for survival. We are praying for good weather and sufficient rain. As pastoralists, we have suffered from the harsh weather patterns in the recent years.
Trade is not good. Livestock owners have moved to other regions in search of pasture and water for their animals. This has reduced the price value for animals, with fewer traders interested in selling their animals.
Livestock trade, mainly to oil-rich Arab countries, accounts for up to 40% of Somalia's GDP. But a combination of climate shocks, outbreak of diseases, and international bans has dealt a huge blow to the industry that provides direct and indirect employment to millions of people across the country. Experts are now warning that the government must do more to protect the sector.
Somalia exports livestock mainly to Arab countries. In the event of natural disasters or any other major issue, the supply of livestock export reduces and in turn affects the overall economy. The government must cushion livestock owners by providing them with vaccines for animals and securing more markets for traders.
The COVID-19 pandemic also led to a reduction in livestock exports as governments around the world moved to impose restrictions and lockdowns in efforts to curb the spread of the infectious disease. In other countries, livestock marketplaces were forced to shut down, further increasing the cost of supplying livestock to international markets, a burden mostly shouldered by Somali livestock traders. A massive locust invasion, the worst in a quarter of a century, has also added to the challenges facing pastoral communities. Parts of Puntland, Somaliland and central regions of the country remain the worst affected. Authorities are now using helicopters to spray biopesticides as more swarms continue to form in new areas. Meanwhile, back at the livestock market, traders say they want government support to help them cushion from future shocks. Abdulaziz Bilu, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
China's leaders are meeting in Beijing to map out the country's next 5-year plan. It's a critical blueprint which will map out the country's development. Protecting the environment has been a critical focus. Green development and ecological progress was written into previous plan for the first time. Timothy Ulrich looks back at the past 5 years.
A greener China is emerging as the country sees overall improvement in its environment with green practices in production and daily life, less pollution, and stable biological diversity. Chinese authorities say compared to 2015, carbon dioxide emissions per GDP fell 8.2% in 2018. The nation's forest coverage rate hit nearly 23%, maintaining a stable state in biodiversity and ecological preservation. And by the end of 2019, China's clean energy consumption made up nearly a quarter of total energy consumption. As for PM 2.5, the fine particles in the air that cause respiratory and cardiovascular illness, there's been a 23% decrease in all of China's 337 prefecture-level cities. The ratio of quality air days reached 82% for the whole year. It's expected that China can accomplish the set goal of 84.5% by the end of this year. In regards to global cooperation on climate change, China has been a staunch supporter of the Paris Agreement. President Xi Jinping also recently announced the goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2060 during a meeting at the United Nations.
China will scale up its intended nationally determined contributions by adopting more vigorous policies and measures. We aim to have CO2 emissions peak before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060.
The goal is also regarded as an opportunity to promote the transformation and upgrading of the nation's economic, energy, and industrial structures. It will help promote the innovation of new technologies and build an economic system featuring green, low-carbon, and circular development. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Egyptian authorities this week have approved the resumption of flights to Libya. The decision follows Libya's move to gradually open its airspace. At least 5 flights will take place weekly between the two countries and will increase over time. Here's Adel Mahri with more.
While Libya is preparing to restart operations at 10 of its domestic airports, Egypt gives the green light for direct flights with Libya to resume. The move will save time for travelers between the two neighbors who have been forced to transit through other countries.
It's a very important step for the many Libyans who seek healthcare in Egypt, who have homes, businesses, and many errands in Egypt. This will also enrich the stagnant ties between Cairo and Western Libya, in a time the nation is moving to create a new executive authority.
Yet none of the first scheduled flights will be to Western Libya. The nation's Africa Airways will operate 5 flights weekly between Egypt's Mediterranean city Alexandria with Tobruk in East Libya. The next destination will be El Abraq, another eastern city.
The resumption of flights will be subject to severe measures imposed from the Egyptian side. Libya is at the peak of its phase 1 of the pandemic. More importantly, security personnel will be reviewing the profiles for all Libyans coming into Egypt. Cairo fears that there may be infiltration of militia fighters and their leaders into the country.
Cairo has previously announced arresting several Libyans coming to Egypt with forged travel documents. Despite restrictions, for Libya, resuming an additional route will help its aviation sector recover from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
For the airline companies, employees have not been paid for more than 8 months. The services company have been struggling to pay salaries for about 30 months. Airport staff were not sacked because the state takes care of them.
Cairo suspended flights completely with Libya when the Libyan civil war intensified last year.
Cairo is proceeding slowly and cautiously in the resumption of flights with Libya. To Egypt, possible security breaches outweigh the economic benefits from operating flights that have phenomenal demands in the two countries. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Medics at Eastern Libya's largest medical center are taking no chances in treating suspected COVID-19 cases as positive. The move follows an increase in the number of positive cases this week. CGTN's Joy Kiruki with the details.
Libya's Benghazi Medical Center, a section has been set apart to treat coronavirus infections. According to Mohammed Al-Kanashi, the director of Al-Amal Tower, the isolation unit, confirmed cases are now 1,175 at the facility.
The number of admissions during a period of 3 or 4 days or a week had decreased, but it returned to increase at the same rate as before, and even more. The reason is that we are starting to enter the winter period and most schools have opened their doors. There are also the middle school exams, and even events and wedding halls have reopened to work normally.
We have reached a stage where when we receive any patient, we treat them as if the PCR test is positive. If the patient has symptoms for which they need to be hospitalized, for example, if the patient has low oxygen or the like, we can admit them. But if the symptoms are minor, the patient can isolate at home and does not need to be in the hospital. But if the condition worsens, they can come here.
Indifference towards precautionary measures, says Al-Kanashi, has contributed to rising cases.
The committee's recommendations regarding social distancing and wearing masks and all of this was not taken into account. So the number of cases increased again, especially during this period. Most of the cases are young men and older men, and this is evidence that the reason is social events and the sort, so the number of cases increased. The rate of deaths continues and has not decreased, as the number of deaths here in the Tower Medical Center from the number of admitted cases has reached 373 cases.
So far, the number of coronavirus cases in Libya have reached over 57,000 and more than 800 deaths. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Let's revisit our top story, where a study has found that antibodies against the coronavirus declined rapidly in the British population during this summer. Scientists at Imperial College London tracked antibody levels in 365,000 randomly selected adults. Professor Carol Sikora is the Dean of Medicine at the University of Buckingham. He says there is much more to the body's immune system than just antibodies.
It means that the antibody response, that's our primary immune rejection of a foreign protein, in this case the virus, wanes a bit. Now, we've known that since the beginning, and indeed every week Public Health England have published a survey of antibody levels in various communities. They come to a maximum 6 weeks after infection, and then they fall. But the other immune mechanisms kick in, including T-cell immunity, lymphocytes, white blood cells that target the virus, and various other things we understand even less well than T cells. So we don't really know what it means. It's a sort of negativity in the newspapers. It's billed as though it's terribly negative. It may not be. And what really matters is, over a period of time, do we as a society build up immunity against the virus?
Would it mean, for example, that we have to continue vaccinating against coronavirus, even if we've had one round of vaccination for coronavirus?
It depends very much what the critical factors are that make the vaccine work. If it is only on antibodies, and we know the vaccines, all the main vaccines that have been tried have been looked for antibody production, and they do make antibodies. If that was the only mechanism, this would be worrying. But almost certainly the same vaccines also stimulate T cells, so it'll be a combination. We won't know whether these vaccines are actually working in reality for some time. We know they stimulate the immune response. Very clear-cut data from Oxford, from Imperial, from the United States. What we don't know is how protective they are out there in the wild, where the virus is there. Do they actually protect the patient sufficiently?
Oxford University's coronavirus vaccine is said to trigger a robust immune response in both young and older adults. Is it time for optimism?
I think so. This is really encouraging. When they say that, they mean the antibody levels are up, albeit temporarily, and the T-cell activity was also up. That data has been published by Oxford and some of the other vaccine makers. This is really good news. However, at the end of the day, we've got to get society up to a level of immunity, either by being infected by the virus or by being vaccinated to prevent them being infected. These are the only two ways we can get an immune population, and therefore the virus will have nowhere to run to and will eventually disappear, and the pandemic will be over. And the most encouraging thing so far is, at least in the UK, The number of admissions per 24 hours into hospital seems to be plateauing, which, you know, it's not great for those being admitted, but it's wonderful that we seem to be reaching the top of what everyone's calling the second wave.
In Mali, Prime Minister Mokhtar Bouane says he is open to talks with Islamist militants whose insurgency has made vast swaths of the country ungovernable. But former colonial power France has signaled opposition to the idea, noting that the Islamist groups had not signed a 2015 peace deal that it considers a framework for restoring peace to northern Mali. Earlier this year, the now ousted President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta was prepared to negotiate with al-Qaeda-linked militants. But those talks were disrupted by protests which saw the overthrow of Keïta. Now, the leaders of the 18-month transition are endorsing that policy for formal negotiations.
Je pense qu'il faut voir en cela une opportunité.
On this question, it is useful to repeat the conclusions on the national inclusive talks that took place here at home, and which clearly indicated the need to offer dialogue with these armed groups. And I think we must see this as an opportunity to engage in far-reaching talks with the communities in order to redefine the contours of a new governance in the concerned spaces. That is a demand for which we must all think together, and will require, and I think I need to say it, and underline it, and I think our partners are conscious on this, it requires a sequencing and coordination with our partners, more specifically, those who intervene militarily in our country.
J'ai bien lu comme vous.
Like you, I have read the declaration of the Secretary General of the United Nations, but I read it in full. If it doesn't bother for me to read it out, we need a global vision for Sahel. There will be groups with whom we will be able to talk and who have an interest in engaging in this dialogue in order to become the political actors of the future. But there remains those whose terrorist radicalism is such that we will have nothing to do with them. That is the Secretary General of the United Nations in the same declaration.
Meanwhile, Tunisians have joined the growing number of countries with many Muslims protesting against France. They have joined calls for a boycott of French products after President Emmanuel Macron defended cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. Many Muslims see it as an attack on Islam.
We're against religious extremism and terrorism, and we're against anything that is not prescribed by religion. But what is happening now, the lack of respect for Muslims and their religious beliefs, is a red line that should not be crossed.
This is all political. All he wants is to have more value in other people's eyes and cause collective disarray.
Protests against Macron have also been held in Bangladesh and cities across Pakistan. The country's parliament has passed a resolution urging the government to recall its envoy from Paris. And other nations in the region, including Turkey, Palestine and Yemen, have also seen people protesting or calling for boycotts. Here now is a reminder of our top stories. A study has found that antibodies against the coronavirus declined rapidly in the British population during the summer, suggesting protection after infection may not be long-lasting. This raises the prospect of decreasing population immunity as many countries battle a second wave of COVID-19. The African Union has called on member states and the international community to contribute to its Africa COVID-19 Response Fund. AU chairperson and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said the fund has raised only a fraction of what is needed. And Egyptian authorities this week have approved the resumption of flights to Libya. The decision follows Libya's move to gradually open its airspace. At least 5 flights will take place weekly between the two countries and will increase over time. Time now to get the latest in business news, and for that we cross over to Uche.
Thanks, Penina. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. The European Union backs Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to lead the World Trade Organization. And resumption of international flights promises to boost South Africa's tourism sector.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, the European Union is backing former Nigerian Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to head the World Trade Organization. Iweala and South Korean Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hee are the two finalists to replace Brazilian Roberto Azevedo at the helm of the World Trade Organization. Now, this means that for the first time in its 25-year history, the WTO will be headed by a woman. Reuters quotes an official who says that EU support for Okonjo-Iweala is considered a strong signal to reinforce the multilateral order and a sign of mutual trust between the bloc and Africa. Now, Okonjo-Iweala is 66 years old and previously served as Nigeria's foreign minister. She's an economist and development specialist serving as board chair of Global Vaccine Alliance, Gavi. And moving on now, South Africa's tourism sector is again open to international travelers under level 1 of a phased reopening of its economy. The sector lost over 50% of its value since the COVID-19 lockdown began at the end of March. The borders have been reopened, but not all international travelers will be allowed in if they are from high-risk nations. Here's Sumitra Naidu with more.
South Africa's tourism sector has bemoaned the introduction of a high-risk country list. This, they say, is creating uncertainty for agents and international visitors who want to plan their travels months in advance.
We have determined, using the WHO criteria, what our average level is. And we've then agreed that countries that significantly are above the level of South Africa's infection and death rates, those countries will remain determined by us as high-risk countries.
The World Travel and Tourism Council found that 44% of leisure travelers in South Africa were international tourists in 2018, making the sector highly dependent on this market. Once Africa's largest tourism sector, South Africa is now losing over $18 million daily due to the lack of international tourists.
As much as there are people from domestic leisure travel going around, the country, we still have, or still going to have a challenge from the income point of view, since we are discounting our prices, and also the demand, while it's there a little bit, it's not sufficient to sustain the industry going forward. So there is a bit of recovery because we're coming from zero. So any number above zero will be welcome.
Popular international attractions like the Cradle of Humankind here in South Africa's economic hub, Gauteng, are yet to open despite a go-ahead from the government to do so. The UNESCO World Heritage Site will only open once it has a new business model in place.
We are not anticipating that if we do away with the list, we will get an influx of tourists coming into the country. This is going to be a long recovery. But the list that we need to do is to ensure that the tourists that are sitting, in our source markets overseas, are aware that we're open for business and they can start to make the bookings for the next 3 months to come.
Business travelers, those with critical skills visas, and people on international missions in sports, arts, culture, and science are the only people allowed to come to South Africa from high-risk countries. South African tourism is hoping that the government will ease up on that high-risk country list to ensure an influx of visitors as we head into the festive season. But it is highly unlikely as more countries are struggling with the second wave of COVID-19. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, a 12-year-old fashion designer is taking the country by storm. Ainsley Quebec has always been a fashionista and started her own label when she was just 10. And she has big plans to have her brand, Ainsley Babes Couture, recognized all over the world, as CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
I really love clothes. I wish I could have my own shop one day and showcase my clothes at an international fashion week. And I really hope other children are inspired by my story and they will always follow their dreams. My name is Ainsley Quebec. I'm 12 years old and I'm a fashion designer. When I was 3, I firstly started choosing out my clothes and telling my mom, I want this and this. So she knew that I'm going to be a fashion designer. I started designing clothes for my dolls. I wanted them to look more African, and then I started feeling, no, I should just dress like my dolls, because I also like it. I liked African fashion, and then I started making clothes for people and children, and I just wanted to make people feel like princesses and princes. I started my brand at 10 years old, 2 years ago on the 8th of October, and it's called Ainsley Babes Couture. I'm basically into ball gowns and stuff like that, and this summer I'm basically going to design simple but cute, casual designs. I loved African prints and I just like the colors and the bling, and I just wanted to uplift African fashion. During the lockdown, I started a more casual summer fun range, which basically I'll mostly post since we're almost out of lockdown. If we do get out of lockdown, it's probably gonna sell because now there's no more lockdown and people are able to buy stuff. I'm in grade 7 right now and I'm almost out of grade 7, and next year I'm going to be going to the National School of Arts in Johannesburg, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Now, the Chinese app VSkit is proving to be a game changer for many budding entertainers in Kenya. Launched barely 2 years ago, the app gives people a platform to create and share short videos, as CGTN's Robin Nagila now finds out.
Kenyan comedian Tesleen is filming a short skit for her fan base on the digital platform VSkit. She's been posting content on the platform for just over a year now. The performer is using it to develop a career in comedy.
It has really helped my comedy skills because I'm able to see what other comedians are doing. I borrow some ideas, then I go create mine.
Launched in 2018, the app, owned by Transit Media, is a joint venture between 2 Chinese tech giants, NetEase and Transsion. The app aims to build the largest community on the African continent.
VSkit is a short video platform where people post videos, funny videos, for the purpose of entertainment.
VSkit is currently working with more than 500 artists across the continent as brand ambassadors. It targets people between the ages of 18 and 30, translating content into local languages with a subscriber base in the tens of millions.
In Africa, we have over 36 million users and 14 million active users.
For comedian Matata Mwenda, the app has also allowed him to explore another of his passions, photography, and generate some income from it.
I get people asking me how much I charge, how I do it, how can they access me.
All you need is a smartphone, download the app, some content, and you're in business. It's not all about comedy, though. Others, like Candy Christine, use the platform to put out content on makeup, fashion, and art. She says it's helped her self-development.
It's also helping me grow in my personality because, you know, when you're creating content, you're doing role play, you're doing so much, you're even learning on your facial expressions.
The platform has given young Africans an opportunity to showcase their talent, but equally important, access to a wider audience. And who knows, Africa's next big act may already be on VSkit. Robert Nagela, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, a conversation around cryptocurrencies. Central banks are warming up to it. PayPal will now allow transactions in crypto. And of course, the digital currency Bitcoin is on the up again. We'll bring you more on that at the top of the hour. For now, back to you.
Thank you, Uche. You're watching Africa Live, still ahead after this break. We look at efforts in availing treatment for epilepsy in Nigeria and fighting stigma around the disease.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In Nigeria, many people with epilepsy suffer from stigma and have poor access to treatment. Not being able to fend for themselves as a result of constant seizures, many are forced to depend on others. The World Health Organization says the burden of epilepsy is greatest in developing countries where treatment is not always readily available. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has more on this story.
For the past 15 years, Pam Samuel has been dealing with epilepsy. He was just 11 when he was first diagnosed with the disease after having a seizure. Now 26, life's been difficult for Samuel, who says he feels limited by his condition. He had to quit school because of his health and takes menial jobs to earn a living.
It started as a joke one morning when I woke up to thick darkness and flashes of light. We went to the hospital and the doctor said I was epileptic. When the crisis starts, I'm being taken to the car like a baby, in and out of the hospital. When the crisis breaks out, it takes me a week to get myself back. This sickness has made me lose out so much on education. I have lost so many opportunities in life. I'm supposed to be far more than this. I shouldn't be here doing this messy job. I should be sitting in an office, a big position. But this sickness has only taken me backwards in life.
Epilepsy is a chronic neurological disorder marked by intermittent seizures that could sometimes be threatening to the patient's safety. Patients are oftentimes stigmatized. African myths have linked epilepsy to witchcraft or contagious ailments.
So mutane ba su zuwa wurin kusa sai an bar shi ya kai kamar minti uku.
We allow the person to lie there for like 3 minutes before we help them. If you don't allow the patient to be on the ground for that long, you will also contact it. The wind will take you down also. In our tradition, we allow the wind to settle before coming to help with native medication. We bring the native grass to burn where the person fell to end the sickness. But if it is witchcraft, it won't go.
The burden of this neurological condition in Nigeria presents various challenges to patients, their families and caregivers. In Nigeria, studies estimate that out of every 1,000 persons, between 5.3 to 37 persons are epileptic.
Management of epilepsy is essentially by removing the triggers, things that can make the person go into epilepsy. This could be maybe some sort of smells that the person does not like, maybe some bright lights, maybe some events. Epilepsy is not a fatal disease or disorder. The problem with epilepsy is that the issue with epilepsy is what the person is doing when this person starts this seizure. If the person was driving and sustains a seizure, the person will obviously have a road traffic accident and may die from it. Now, the length or duration of the seizure is also an important thing.
The cause of epilepsy is still unknown in about 50% of cases globally, according to the World Health Organization, though it's accelerated by loud noise, intense light, shock and other underlying health conditions. Health experts advise close monitoring of a patient's environment to remove all harmful objects during an episode, and also for community influencers to sensitize people against stigmatization. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And coming up in sports, Tokyo Olympics organizers propose new health protocols to be used during the Games.